Vayishlah. I'd like to thank Jessica Baitner for sponsoring today's class in the Refuah Shlema of Yael Liora Batsara. I'd also like to dedicate our learning today to Chana Ruth Batsara and wishing her husband Avraham ben Yosef Batya and her son Ram ben Chana Ruth Yonatan a full recovery. And everybody should, God willing, be restored to their strongest self and health. So today, Parashat Vayishlah. I hope that I can get in even a tip of what's being spoken about here. I'll start from the beginning. I guess that's always the easiest way to start. Parashat Vayishlah is in chapter 32. It starts in Pasuk 4 in the book of Bereshit. If you're following in the blue books, it's on page 170. It starts pretty innocently that, Jessica, yes. It starts pretty innocently. Vayishlach Yaakov malachim lefanav. Yaakov sends these angels or messengers ahead of him to Esav Achiv, to Esav his brother, to Sedeh, to Arza Seir, to the country of Seir, which is Sedeh Edom. And it seems pretty, we really should question the reason why Yaakov might be sending messengers to his brother Esav. We know there's a background, there's a heavy, heavy history that's taking place here. We already know why Yaakov had left. We discussed last week the possible reasons, maybe because he wanted to run away from his brother who said he would kill him, or maybe because he wanted to find a wife that would not be from the Benot Canaan like Esav had married, or maybe possibly because he needed to become a whole person. He needed to complete his better half, his other half. He was a twin, and now that he lost his half, now that he lost Esav, he had to be both Yaakov and Esav rolled into one. And then when we get now to Parashat Vayishlach, and along the way we've been seeing this metamorphosis, along the way we've been seeing this transformation that Yaakov is undergoing. He doesn't marry one wife, but he gets two sisters. He's sort of trying, it seems, the commentaries, now I understand why they say that Leah was destined for Yaakov and she cried till her eyelashes fell off. I understand that in a different context, that now Yaakov, as Yaakov and Esav, has to marry Rachel and Leah. There's this part of Yaakov that needs to be completed. This wholeness, this search for being shalem is going to be one of the major themes that we're going to encounter. And if we just went back to the end of last week's, the last pasuk that takes place for us is that even after Yaakov leaves Laban's house, what happens? Pasuk 3, we're starting here, the beginning of Vayishlach is starting in Pasuk 4, but Pasuk 3 last week had said, Vayifge'u bo malache Elohim, the angels of Elohim come to him, and when Yaakov sees them, he says, this is Machane Elohim, and he calls the place Machanayim. This is already setting us up for today, what Yaakov is going to establish. He's going to have seen this vision of angels, and he's going to already see this construct of machanayim, of tents, of camps. There's still a wholeness that hasn't been achieved. There's still machanayim, there's still separate camps. There's still, and now I'd like to look at the words a little bit more carefully, there's still this understanding that Yaakov has that he's sending malachim lefanav. He's sending things in front of him. He's putting things in the forefront. We will see it very clearly in the language that Yaakov's positioning of himself is constantly putting everything in front, and then he stays behind. He is the one who is sort of leading from behind in a way that I think the Torah wants to impress upon us that maybe being in the back all the time is not the means by which Yaakov is going to become whole. In order to become whole, let's just take this shepherding for a minute, because that's what he becomes. He goes from the Yoshev Ohalim, he becomes a shepherd. He goes out there, he externalizes, and he does engage with the world. But in engaging with the world, he's still the one behind. He's still the one that's holding on to his brother's heel. His brother comes out, he comes out behind. He's sending malachim, he's sending them to go in front of him. And we're going to see that all of a sudden, Esav is going to be portrayed as the one who's in the forefront. And we started to talk about shepherding. So I Googled it. I wasn't sure what the right position was for a shepherd. If a shepherd's supposed to go in front of his flocks and lead them, or if a shepherd's supposed to go behind his flocks. I don't know why, but I was just curious to know what the optimum methodology was for shepherds. And I would say there's something to argue for both. If you go ahead, you could lead and show the way. If you stay behind, you can keep an eye on everybody. And sure enough, there's a whole debate online. They quickly compare it to forms of parenting. Is it better to parent from behind, let them make their mistakes, and you watch them and you guide them from the back? Or should you just set the path and not allow for creativity? I mean, there's so many different ways. It turns out there's Eastern methods and Western methods of shepherding. But for our class today, if Yaakov, if his profession now, if he's making a career for himself in shepherding, it seems that he's taking the approach of letting things go in front of him, and he is in the background. Just so you know, again, this is Google, I don't even know, I'm not a shepherd, but it seems to be that most, whether it's parenting or actual shepherding, most opinions will say that the most successful shepherd is the one who splits his time, is partially in the front of his flock, often on the side, and sometimes in the back. Has a movement about him. It's not just about positioning yourself in one space. That's going to really be, I believe, part of what the Torah is going to transmit to us in this story of Yaakov sending angels to his brother Esav. So let's talk about that a little bit. Where is Yaakov headed, and why does he even have to send those messengers? He needs to cross over into Bet El. He had made a neder specifically to God. And the neder that he had made to God, I'm actually going to read it for you because I want you to hear the words of it. It was last week in Vayetze, but the words specifically say, Vayidor Yaakov neder. Yaakov had made a neder, and he said, if Elohim is going to be with me and protect me in my journey that I am going on and gives me bread to eat and clothing to wear, and if I return in peace to the house of my father, this is all in chapter 28, the last few Pesukim 20 and 21. If I return in peace to my father's house, then God will be my Elohim, and this Evan that I put here as a monument will be Bet Elohim, will be the house of God, and everything that you give me, God, I will give you 10% of. And it seems that he needs to get back to this place, whether we want to call it Bet El, Bet Elohim. He needs to get back to his origins, to that place where he originally had his dream. And he needs to get back there specifically because he made a neder. Aviva Zornberg once said, and she definitely said it better than I'm going to try and repeat it for you, but she said, the space between the mouth and the hand is a perilous place. Meaning, be very careful with what you say with your mouth, because whatever it is that you say, the neder that you make with your mouth is something that your hands are going to have to deliver, so to speak. And it's the counterpart. If you're going to talk the talk, then you need to walk the walk. But I would like to say, and after Aviva said it, I gave it some thought for this week's parashah, and I think that what resonates with a neder, especially for Yaakov, is what his father Yitzchak had said. The prophetic statement that Yitzchak said when he said, Hakol kol Yaakov v'hayadayim yedei Esav. I think it speaks to us today. I think Yitzchak is saying, Yaakov, you're all about the talk. You're all about the making the nedarim. But if you want to become whole and you want to incorporate your brotherness into you so that you could be one again, then you're going to have to adopt the Yadayim Yedei Esav, the action part. You can't just make a neder. And many commentaries say, by the way, this parasha, right now just in the beginning of it, but just to give you a little overview for a second, this parasha has so many stories. Each one of them is a major shi'ur in and of itself. We have him now sending messengers. Then we're going to have the famous meeting. And before he meets with Esav, he's going to struggle with an angel. And after he meets with Esav, Dinah is going to get taken. And after that, we're going to hear that the Mineket Rivka, that Devora, the nursemaid of Rivka, dies, and Yaakov mourns her. And then Rachel gives birth to Binyamin, and she mourns him. Then you have, because right after Rachel dying, we have the story of Reuven coming in to take Bilhah. That's a whole nother episode. And then finally, just so you have a global view of this week's parasha, it ends with the lineage of Esav, with the family line of Esav. So let's go back now to our beginning. Our beginning, Yaakov is sending messengers. Maybe you can argue that he's sending the very angels that he saw one verse ago at the end of last week's parasha. Maybe he figures he's going to send them. But notice that what he calls his brother is Esav Achiv. On a conscious level, Yaakov still realizes that Esav is his brother. And he tells them, this is what you should say, Le Adoni, to my master, to Esav. Now, whether he was looking to flatter Esav, or whether he was looking to convince himself or convince his messengers, either way, he calls Esav his master. Not only does Esav become the master, but he says, Ko amar avdecha Yaakov. This is what your servant Yaakov says. I have lived with Lavan, va'echad ad ata. There's that word again, and I'm in the back. I'm in the acharon. I'm still the one that's trailing behind. Even after all this time that I've lived with Lavan, and living with Lavan, we're going to see soon, was very, very profitable for him. He says, I have a shor, I have a chamor. We know he didn't have one shor and one chamor. And of course, this is where the commentaries will come and say, don't flaunt your wealth. It's better to say, I have a little bit of this and a little bit of that. It's on one Evid, one Shivcha, everything in the singular. Maybe he didn't want to arouse the jealousy of his brother by letting him know how wealthy he was. There's a lot going on here, but I want to move forward. And he says, I am sending this to tell Adoni, my master, so that I could find favor in your eyes. That's the message. I have a couple of things, and I really, really want to have a reconciliation with you, my brother. And the angels come back and they tell Yaakov, we came to your brother. We came to Esav. And he happens to be, would you believe the coincidence? He happens to be also coming to greet you with 400 men. Now, the commentaries chat room blows up. 400 men, for sure, there's a war, he's coming, and that's the way that they read this. I would like to suggest that I don't want to read it that way. Just because Esav is coming with 400 men doesn't have to mean that there's an imminent attack going to happen. And the reason I say that, and I say this all the time, we are privy to the end of the story. We're reading this already knowing that they hug, that they kiss. We're going to read the words of how the meeting, the showdown between Yaakov and Esav, the big, meeting that's going to happen that everybody's holding their breath for. I always say I'm jealous of the people who don't know what's going to happen, and I'm sorry if I'm killing the punchline for you. But I'd like to suggest for today, since I entitled the class, Sending the Right Message, there are messages that Yaakov is clearly sending to Esav. There are messages that he is getting in return. But most of all, this is going to be about the messages that we tell ourselves and the way we choose to process events and the way we choose to process information. Me and you just read that 400 men are coming with him. And had the scenario not been where Esav had said, as soon as my father's mourning period is over, I'm going to kill my brother Yaakov. Had he not said that, which we went through last week, he really just said it Billy Ball. But anyway, we would never imagine. Let's just talk about it for 1 second. Do you think Lavan's house was a fortress? Do you think you need the Mossad to find Yaakov? Esav was there. He heard his father say, go to Haran. Here's the coordinates. Forward your mail there. He would have been able to find him for 22 years. If he wanted to attack him, he had every opportunity. And he never did. I need to put that on the table also. But what happens in verse 8 is, Vayira Yaakov me'od. Yaakov is in a state of either awe, many people call yirah fear. Either way, vayitzer lo, the word yitzer, like yotzer, could mean that very fear is what helped form him, helped create him. Of course, it means, it goes on to say, vayichatz et ha'am, he splits the nation that he has with him. He splits the tzon, the bakar, the gemalim into two machanot. And he says, if Esav comes to one machaneh and he attacks it, at least the other machaneh will be able to survive. This idea of machanot, we saw it already last week. Yaakov is still a split persona. He's still not integrated. He's still not one whole. He's still able to tell his family. I mean, it's a little chilling if you actually read this, who lives and who dies. Instead of all of us dying, maybe just half of us will die. That attitude, the message that he's sending himself, what's prompting Yaakov's actions, what prompts us to come up with the worst case scenario. There's not just the worst case scenario that Esav is going to hit one machaneh and the other one is going to run away. This is Yaakov's best case scenario. That's even scarier. And it's because the frame of mind that he's in. And we have to talk about what frame of mind I read it too. Yes, his brother's coming with 400 men. I get it. But that tips off Yaakov to the worst degree of panic. Watch, it's not me saying he's going to panic. Read verses 10, 11, 12. I'll read them with you. Yaakov, and this is really the first formal prayer. This is the first prayer where somebody in Torah is praying to God and asking for something specific. I didn't notice this till this morning when I reread it, and I'll tell you. First, let's see, he says, God, the Father of my father Abraham, and the God of my father Isaac, Hashem, the Yud Kevavke, the one that told me to go back to my land, to my birthplace, and you told me things would be good for me. God, I'm in verse 11. Katonti mikol chasadim mikol ha'emet. God, I am either diminished, I am unworthy. These are not my words. These are different versions of commentaries, how they see it. I see it as I have been diminished from all of the chesed that you have done for me. Why? Because everything that God has done already for Yaakov, how is it possible that he could still be in panic mode? What did we say last week? We had a whole class, not us, Yaakov, he had a dream. And God came to the dream. And God told him, Yaakov, it's you and me against the world. I don't care what anybody else says. I don't care. It doesn't matter, Yaakov. You have a vertical connection to me. And as long as you keep that vertical connection that we have, you're never alone. And all of the Yaakov from last week, who needs to get back to that place because he made a neder. And what is a neder? A neder means allow my words to substitute for my actions temporarily until I get my act together. That's really what a neder is. God, right now I can't deliver and I need credit. I need you to give me something and I will pay it in the future. That's what a neder is. Well, guess what? The payment's due. And what was it that God wanted from Yaakov? He wanted him, whether we said he wanted him to integrate his upper brain and his lower brain, his sense of logic with his sense of impulse, his Yaakovness with his Esavness, his inactivity, his introvertedness, his Ish Ohalim with the outside world. Whatever it was that needed to be integrated, God was telling him, if you integrate all that, then you'll be this higher self. You'll be able to be this person that could take on the world. And here in verses 11 and 12, he's falling apart. First he says, Katonti mikol hachasadim mikol ha'emet. Yes, the rabbis say a nice thing. I'm not worthy. I'm too katan. Your chesed and emet is too big for me. But this could also be an educational lesson. Katonti mikol chasadim. If you do too much chesed, my father used to always say, too good, no good. If you do too much for somebody, it's not good. You're not helping them grow. You're not allowing them. It's the leading, like the sheep. If you're just going to lead them and not let them learn for themselves. So it could be that he's saying, Hashem, you did everything for me, and now I can't do anything for myself. That's another way to be able to read it. And he does admit that I crossed this Jordan with just a stick in my hand, and now I am two full camps. Again, the idea of two camps, Shnei Machanot. We want to be happy that he's two full camps, but something inside of us is saying he is still not integrated. He is still two camps. He is not one whole. And then he says these words. This is the prayer. This is the first recorded prayer of this sort where they're asking God. You know, it says Yaakov, if you're wondering, didn't Yaakov pray for a baby? Didn't Abraham pray for a baby? Didn't we have other prayers before? We did, but it just says that they prayed. But they didn't actually put the prayer for us here in writing. Here the prayer is, Hatzileni na miyad achi, miyad Esav. Please save me from my brother, from Esav, because I am either in fear, I believe I am in awe of him, because I believe that he has the power to come, vehikani em albanim. He has the power to come and attack me, the mother together with the children. And there's so much taking place here. So the first part we want to say is Yaakov is not speaking from a place of strength. He is saying, God, I want you to help me, as opposed to, God, it's you and me against the world. Let's go get him. No, this is definitely a whole different attitude that's being spoken to. And again, this is the worst thing that anybody could do for themselves, ourselves, ever, is keep coming up with hypothetical, worst case scenarios. I can't say it enough times, because we come up with these scenarios. We think we're so clever. We think we're being anticipatory. But what we're really doing is we're creating realities in our mind, and then we're responding to them. So when he doesn't just say, save me from my brother, that means already I know my brother wants to attack me. He's also saying, let me think what he's going to do. He's going to break every rule of war. He's not going to fight fair. He's going to kill women and children. Even back then, women and children were not part of the war casualties. Women and children were sacred. They're not, but you're not allowed to, they're untouchable. And he's trying to say, Esav's not going to fight fair. So I need you to help me. And of course, there's another undertone. This em albanim could be speaking about Rivka, the mother who was part of getting the blessing taken away from him in the first place. So maybe my mother will have to suffer some kind of retribution. I mean, there's so much that he's saying here. But for us today, this prayer, let me finish what he says, the next verse. And God, you said, Ata amarta, I will I will make it good for you. I will make your children like the sand on the by the ocean, by the waters, so many that you can't count them. And he sleeps that night. So I would say that at that point, that's the end of his prayer. The one thing that struck me, I said this morning, I went back, I said, hey, wait a minute. Usually we've had until now, when somebody prays to God, what usually happens is God usually answers them, right? Vayetar, you go, you pray, next day you're getting pregnant. Rivka goes to speak to God, and God answers her. There's no answer here from God. God doesn't answer Yaakov, and I love that. You know what God is saying? You know, sometimes your kid asks a question and it really shouldn't even be dignified with an answer. So you just, anything you say at that point is going to minimize the lesson. By not giving the answer, what we do is we create a space for the child to fill in the blank and answer his own question. What God is doing, I believe here, the Father of all fathers is saying, Yaakov, you're directing your energies in the wrong way, to the wrong place. You're making a phone call to me, says God, when the answer is right in front of you. You have what you need to survive. It's not always the best tactic or the best strategy. It's a great way. Be careful. Of course, we want to pray to God. And of course, we want to partner with God. And he's part of our every being, our every minute, our every essence, our every thought. Yes. But when you start with the blubbering, he's going to kill me. He's going to kill my wives. He's going to kill my children. Guess what? If you want to go down that pity party, you're going to do it by yourself, Yaakov. I'm not going down that road with you. I didn't create you to be that person, says God. And so I'm not even going to engage or answer your prayer at this point, because there's prayer and there's hishtadlut. And yes, the rabbis give him a very A+. They say he does both. He does his hishtadlut, he sends gifts, he sends messengers, he splits his camp, and he also prays to God. I agree. But this form of prayer, and I would have been much more comfortable, and he starts to say it, God, you made me a promise. Yeah, we could say, God, you made me a promise. But when we're praying to God, why would we give him the worst case scenarios? How about we give him the best case scenarios? And we say, I think this is a lesson in prayer. And not say, God, I'm worried this, and this is going to happen, all these horrible things. How about God just shift it to the optimistic view, to the positive view, and say, God, this is where I see myself. I see myself with my health restored. I see myself with my peace with my brother. I see myself becoming whole. I see myself walking into my Father's house, holding hands with my brother. Just for a minute. Why aren't we coming up with the best case scenario? And I think the Torah is telling us, when we come up with the worst case scenarios in our prayer, God says, I'll see you later. It's not for me to come up with the best case scenario. It's for you to believe and trust that I could make the best things happen. I don't want to come into this prayer because I don't want to be a part of your negativity and your envisioning of the worst. And so with this, and then we have to ask ourselves a big question. Why is Yaakov imagining that his brother is going to kill him? And stop telling me because his brother thought it in his head. I'm going to say this. I think Yaakov was looking back in time and he's asking himself, there was two brothers, famous, you all have heard of them before Yaakov and Esav ever came on the scene. And you know who those two brothers were. Cain and Hevel, the first two brothers ever in history. And what happened with those two brothers? One brother actually killed the other brother. And when Cain kills Hevel, Hevel is, his entire family is destroyed. And only Cain survives. And in his little analogy, what Yaakov did was he positioned himself as the victim. He positioned himself as Hevel. And of course, the big bad wolf, the big aggressor, the murderer, the Cain, in Yaakov's mind was who? Clearly was Esav. Hatzileni na miyad achi miyad Esav. He's going to kill me. I need your help, God. The only problem with this story, and that's why I said we have to be very careful that we send the right message. He sent this message to his brain. I am Hevel. And he told it to himself enough times. I am the victim. I am the weak one. I am the doomed one. I am the one that's going to be the murdered by his brother. And what happens when he does that? He starts to play the role. He becomes a Hevel-like. Hevel was a shepherd. I'm a shepherd. Hevel brought sheep to God. Oh, let me bring minchati. Let me bring all kinds of sheep to my brother. Maybe if you'll take my mincha the way that Hevel's mincha was accepted, maybe it'll mean that you'll accept me. And all of this language is going to come. Vayikach min haba beyado. The next verse says he sleeps there that night and he takes min haba beyado. We're starting to use our hands, our Yedei Esav, right? A mincha le'esav. Why is he giving him a mincha per se? The mincha was what started the whole problem with Cain and Hevel. They each brought a mincha to God. And so now Yaakov is saying, let me bring a mincha, let me bring it to you, my brother, to Esav. And on top of it, the guilty conscience piece comes to play. He gives him izim matayim. We don't have time for it today, but if you read verses 15 and 16, you'll see that all the animals that Yaakov gives are very, very strategic. He gives 20 of the big animals and 200 of the little animals, little animals, 10 little animals or whatever it is, 220 of one little animal, 20 big animals to 10 little. Okay, I'm going to read it for you better from the text because I'm jumbling it up. He gives 200 of the izim, 200 of the big goats. Now that doesn't make sense. All the little animals he had only given 20 of. I'm sorry. All the little animals he had given 200 of. All the big animals he had given 20 of. He's giving less big animals, more little animals. I apologize. But when it comes to the izim, when it comes to the particular animal, the one that he used to fool his father, the izim that he used to feed and make believe that he was Esav, when it comes to that particular animal, it's a big animal, he should have only given 20 of it, he gives 200 of that one. He breaks the pattern to show when it comes to izim, chatati, aviti, pashati, I was wrong. I did the wrong thing with the izim, and now I'm doing my kapara by giving, instead of 20 of this huge animal, I'm giving 200 of it. And we start to see that Yaakov is understanding that he did something wrong, and that's why he's bringing a mincha back to Cain and Hevel. He wants to be accepted. Now, if we read this story in its entirety, we'll notice something very unusual. And we see it in every verse we're reading. He sends mincha le'esav achiv. Esav is constantly being referred to as his brother, as his brother, as his brother. Well, guess what? If you read these verses, this story, we will see that the word achiv, his brother, appears exactly 7 times. That wouldn't be so amazing, except when we go back and read the story of Cain and Hevel. And in our story, the brother is always Esav. Well, guess what? When we go back and we read the story of Cain and Hevel, I invite you to please read it on your own time. You'll see that the word brother also appears there exactly 7 times. And you know who the brother is every single time in that story? The brother every single time in that story, in Parashat Bereshit, is always Hevel. Hevel and Esav both appear as the brother in their story exactly 7 times. I think there's a literary message being said here. It's being whispered to the readers. It really is trying to whisper it to Yaakov, but he's not hearing it. It's saying, Yaakov, you think you're Mr. Innocent. You think you're the one that your brother wants to kill. That's not who you are, my friend. Your brother Esav, he is Hevel. All this time you're thinking you're the victim, but you were really the aggressor. You really stripped him of his identity. You really stripped him of his beracha. You stripped him of himself. You said, I am Esav. You took his identity. When you steal a person's identity, it's like you killed them and you took their persona for yourself. So wait a minute, says the Torah. If that's the case, If the brother that's 7 times in our story should correlate with the brother who's 7 times in the Cain Hevel story, here's the scary part. We don't want to say, well, if Esav parallels with the innocent Hevel victim, then what? Nobody wants, don't even, nobody's going to even unmute themselves. I'm not worried about this. But where does that leave Yaakov? So I'll just tell you, so we see how magnificent and perfect the Torah is. We check how many times Yaakov's name appears in his story. And it's not anything exciting. It's 16 times. What are you going to do with that? Nothing. Unless, of course, we go back to the Cain story. And we see how many times does Cain's name appear in his story. You could imagine my shock when I'm circling. It can't be, could it be? And sure enough, 16 times Cain's name is mentioned in his story. Cain 16, Yaakov 16. What is the Torah telling us? It's saying you need to start to look in the mirror. And you need to stop looking at yourself as the victim. And we know this. We know, and like I said, he doesn't even realize he's being Hevel, like he's being like that shepherd that Hevel was. He's sending sheep. He's doing everything that's going to follow here is going to be Yaakov not knowing who he is. And it's not always so fantastic to see yourself as the victim. And we're going to see now what happens. I'll just read it for you quickly so you have the full sense of it. After he gives him all of these animals, again, verse 17, it's going to keep pounding at us. He gives in the hands of his servants, flock by flock, and he tells his servants, Ivru lefanai. Where is he still positioned? He's still positioned in the back. Yaakov still isn't able to be that forefront guy. The forefront guy we had seen is Esav gam holech likratcha. Esav is coming forward to meet you, and you are constantly hiding in the back. You're putting your sheep in front of you. You're putting your kids in front of you. You're putting your wives in front of you. And you know, we read a lot about the kings, the greatest kings, the most successful, beloved kings are the ones who went in front of their armies. Where was Paro, the non-beloved king? Paro, the non-beloved king, he stayed in the back. Remember that midrash where everybody went into the Yam Suf and he never went in because he was all the way at the end? He's not taking that forefront, that front role. So what does he say? He says, Ivru lefanai, you go in front of me. And if Esav happens to see you and asks you who all of these belong to, make sure you say that this is your servant. By the way, why does he keep saying, calling himself the servant? Because the blessing, thank you, Michelle. I see in the Israeli army, the commander always goes in the front. Bravo. Why is he calling himself the servant? Because the blessing had said, Ya avducha amim, yishtachavu lecha leumim. The blessing that he had gotten was that he was going to be the master and his brother was going to be the servant. And so here he's reversing it. He's trying to say, Esav, you want to kill me because I took the blessing, but the blessing materialized to nothing. You're my Adon and I'm your Eved. And again, the words, Vehine gam hu acharenu. Maybe what he's trying to do is give an optic that Yaakov is not in the forefront, rather Yaakov is in the background. And look at you, Esav. You're all the way, always in the front. And anyway, he gives instruction. This is how you should speak to Esav. And you should say again, this is not me being repetitive, again in verse 21, Yaakov acharenu. Yaakov, he's in the back of the bus. Yaakov, he's in the back. He didn't ever make it to the front. You, Esav, were in the front. because Yaakov said, maybe achapera panav, maybe I can do a kapara. Maybe this is my Yom Kippur. I gave a class one time giving this pasuk as a proof that we need to have a Yom Kippur before we could have Sukkot, because at the end of all this, Yaakov is going to go to Sukkot. So he's saying, please, I want to find favor in your eyes. Ulai yisapanai. Maybe you'll lift up my face, like Lama naflu panecha. Whose face had fallen? Velama charalach. Do you remember that verse? God had asked Cain, why did your face fall down? Well, Yaakov, here, you're the one whose face is falling. Can't you see yourself? Can't you see in the mirror? Look what you've become. And then he passes everything over. Long story short, I want to get to the part where in between this story, and I wish we had time for it today, but we don't, we have the very interesting struggle that Yaakov has with this Ish, this mystery man, whether it's Esav's archangel, whether Yaakov is fighting with forces within himself, whatever it is, there's some type of a struggle, whether it's an inner struggle, an external struggle, both. I mean, there's so much to be said here. But Yaakov does undergo a name change here. And instead of being called Yaakov, he's called Yisrael. And maybe it's a reminder that you're a Sad. You're a Sad with Elohim. You're a Sad with Anashim. Get a grip of yourself, Yaakov. It's the same thing that he told him last week at the ladder. You have what it takes. Stop playing the victim. Stop thinking that everybody's out to get you, and stop creating scenarios in your mind that are rendering you completely paralyzed. And so as we move forward, he finally does meet in the beginning of chapter 33. He finally does meet with Esav. And Yaakov lifts his eyes and he sees Vehine Esav. Look, with Esav we have Vehine, behold. God is with Esav. God is invested with Esav. I'm making you uncomfortable, I'm sorry, but the Torah is not just going to invest God with Esav. It's going to have an entire chapter dedicated to the lineage of Esav. So let's see what the Torah is telling us. It's not whether God is with Esav or not. It's if God is with Esav, then clearly he's with whoever thinks and incorporates and integrates God into their story. So Vehine Esav ba, and he has the same 400 men are with him. And he splits the children with Leah, and he splits the other ones with Rachel, and he puts the Shefachot and Yaldehen in the front, and then he puts Leah behind them, and then Rachel and Yosef behind them, and then finally he passes before them, and this is a very key part to the story. We don't really pay so much attention to it. We pay so much attention to the fact that he puts the Shefachot in the front and he keeps Rachel the most protected with Yosef in the back. That we always paid attention to. But Vehu avad lifnehem. Circle this if you have your own Chumashim, verse 3, chapter 33. He finally goes in front of them and he bows 7 times until he reaches his brother. What did he just do? We should be cheering. We should be screaming. We're not even paying attention to this one little detail. It's the whole story. The point that Yaakov decides that he's going to go in front of his army, that he's going to represent them, that he's going to protect them, like you girls put in the chat, like the Israeli commander who goes before to protect and guide his army. He, at this point, has now recreated himself. And what happens? We have to take a minute to look at verse 4. I know you don't like talking about Esav, it makes people uncomfortable, but we have to. It's right here, verse 4. Let's talk about Esav. What does he do? Does he pull out his weapon? Does he give him a dirty look? Does he, I don't know. If I never read this before, I would not expect this. So much so that the commentaries, especially the ones who lived during the time of the Romans, couldn't accept verse 4 for what it is, because they say that Edom later on becomes the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire wreaked a lot of havoc and killed a lot of Jews. And so if the Roman Empire comes from Esav, comes from Edom, they can't possibly, and I can't blame them, from the time that they're living, their perspective of this was very much influenced by all of the bloodshed. But today, just reading verse 4, Ba'ashed Husham, the way the verse is written at this time. Let's see Rikuz Pe'alim. Let's see how many times, how many verbs are being used here. And I saw somebody put in the chat, they want you to notice all the dots on top of the Vayishakehu. And the commentaries use that to say that it wasn't for, well, let's read it together. So Vayaros, the first thing Esav does is that he runs. That's pretty active of him. Vayechabkehu, he hugs him. Vayipol al savarav, he falls on his neck. And I know, please, for 1 minute, just come with a clean, open mind. I know you're all saying that he was hugging him and he tried to bite him, and Yaakov's neck turned to stone when he bit him, and Esav was crying because his teeth fell out, and then Yaakov was crying because his neck was hurting. Take all that out of the equation for 1 second, just for 1 second, a minute. Let's look. Esav comes, he hugs him, he falls on his neck, he kisses him, and they cry. Look, if you want to put violins in the background of this pasuk, you can. It's very beautiful. It's a reunion of two brothers. Except that we so got into, problem is that we embraced the Yaakov paranoia in reading the story. And so we're reading it and was, nah, can't be. Can't be that he really hugged him. Can't be that he really kissed him. Can't be that he was genuine. And most of the commentary says it wasn't genuine. It wasn't genuine. It wasn't genuine. And I'm going to say, guess what? Ba'asher Husham, maybe right now. Because if that's not genuine enough for you, after they have their whole conversation and Esav says, no, thank you. I have everything. I don't need any of your stuff. And he tells him, Yesh li rav achi. Please, I have a lot. And he calls him my brother. And he says, Yehi lecha asher lach. You have what's yours, I'll have what's mine. I don't need your stuff. And it's not until he practically forces it on him. It's not until Yaakov says, please, if you don't take this from me, if you take it, it'll be like I'm seeing the face of God. Why? Because Yaakov seeing the face of God means it'll be like seeing the face of God means being accepted by God. Again, like Hevel was accepted by God. I know he moved forward and he took a very big forward move, and we applauded him for going like the Israeli commander in front of his army. But emotional gains are fluid. We take 1 step forward, 2 steps back. And he did take a step forward, and it was fantastic. But I want you to see what happens now moving forward. He says, please, in verse 11, take my beracha that I gave you. Really referring to, if I could give you back the beracha, it's caused me nothing but sleepless nights. Please take the darn beracha, take it back. I can't give you the beracha, so I'm going to give you everything that may have come along as a result of the beracha. Here, please, take it. And he says, Vayiftzar bo, he practically forces it on him. And then that's when Esav, who I'm going to keep insisting at this point was very noble, He accepts it. He accepts it just for the sake of his brother, because his brother insisted so much. And I know I'm not in person with you, so I can't see if you're rolling your eyes. I can't see if there's smoke coming out of your ears. I know it makes people uncomfortable when I say nice things about Esav, but I want to show you this verse and maybe you'll start to understand it's not for me to glorify Esav. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to show you that Yaakov's growth could only come about if he changes his view of Esav. Ultimately, our own growth is going to come about when we're able to change our view, when we make these visions or we create these pictures of people and we demonize them in our minds. They are beyond repair. So I personally, this is my little way to say, 1 second, was he always horrible, Esav? Let's look, verse 12. You know what Esav tells his brother? Nis'a v'nelecha. Come on, my brother. Let's travel together. Ve'elcha lenegdecha. And I will go right along with you. And you know what he answers him? Yaakov says, thank you, my brother, but you know, the children, they're still too young, and the sheep, they're still nursing, and if I push them, they're not going to make it. Vametu, they'll die. So you know what? Ya'avor na Adoni, you, my master, you, Esav, you go lifne avdo. I'm happy in the back. I'm going to stay back here. You go on ahead. I'll go at my own pace. And then at some point, I will greet you and I will meet you in Seirah. And Esav says, what are you talking about? You know, we didn't have an issue when Yaakov insisted that we take that Esav take the gifts. So Esav is going to be a little bit pushy too, and he's going to say, no, 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 I don't see it as pushy. I see it as gracious. Esav says, Atzigana, let me assign some of my people that are with me so that we could help you along on the journey. I understand the sheeps are nursing. I see Audrey's commenting, thank you, you're agreeing with me that it doesn't seem like he's so terrible. He's saying, let me escort you. You need carriers, we'll carry the children. You need people to help you, we'll help you. I'll provide the escorts for you. But Yaakov refuses. Yaakov wants nothing to do with his brother Esav. And for that, I'd like to say, there is a story here that's going to continue throughout the ages. These words, nis'a v'nelecha, they don't appear in Torah often at all. The next time we see this word v'nelecha, do you know where we see it? We see it in chapter 43. We see it when Yehuda wants to take Binyamin back to Egypt so that they could get food and they could save Shimon, or the brother that was taken. I'd like to read for you chapter 43, starting in verse 8, just a couple of verses. Vayomer Yehuda al Yisrael Aviv. So Yehuda tells his father Yisrael. Notice how he's called Yisrael here. Shilcha hana'ad. Remember our parasha is called Vayishlah? And remember how you had an issue with your brother in Vayishlah? And you sent messengers because you thought he wanted to kill him and all that? Shilcha hana'aditi. Guess what, Daddy? This is a chance to get it right. Venakuma Venelecha. And this way we will rise up again. We know what that word lakum means for us. We will achieve our mission. We will rise to our greatest potential. Venelecha. And let us go. I'll just remind you that Yaakov didn't want the brothers to go down to Egypt because they would have to take Binyamin, and he was afraid that something would happen to Binyamin along the way. But Yehuda and Reuven makes a case but fails, and Yehuda makes this case and he says, Nakuma venelecha, let's do that nelecha, the one that your brother had asked you to go along with him, that nis'a venelecha, that one that you didn't take advantage of, now let's do that. And then he says, V'nichyeh v'lo namut. The next generation, Yehuda says, Daddy, we will live. We won't die. Gam anachnu, gam ata, gam tapenu. We'll all live. And it's said in the context that if we don't bring food from Egypt, then everybody's going to die. So let us bring food and everybody will live. But I think he's reminding his father, remember you thought that Esav, your brother, was going to kill you? And you thought the tapim, those little children, that the little yeladim, that they couldn't travel and you were hiding them and you thought so many bad things were going to happen to them? Well, guess what, Daddy? Those little children, we're all grown up now. And us little children, we were there when Uncle Esav invited you to come along with him. And we heard you say no. And we heard that he said that that he would help you. And so what is Yehuda now saying? He's saying, Anochi ervenu, miyadi tevakshenu. You didn't use your hands. You didn't incorporate Esav. I'm going to say, miyadi, let my hands, Daddy, let my hands, says Yehuda, let my hands do what you weren't able to do. And then he says, Im lo havioti velecha, if I don't bring him back to you, Vehitzagtiv lefanecha, the same exact word that Esav had used, atzigana. He's saying, I will escort him and I will protect him the way Esav would have escorted and protected you. And I don't want to remind you that when they don't get escorted, what ends up happening to Dinah in this week's parasha. And then he says, V'chatati lecha kol hayamim. Daddy, if I don't bring him back, I will be sinning to you all the days of my life. What does that have to do with all the days of his life? We had learned in previous classes that it takes 7 generations to do kapara. It took 7 generations. See, what happened with Yaakov is he didn't read the end of Cain's story. He didn't read that God had said, Shiv'atayim you come, in 7 generations, you will be forgiven. And you know what Yehuda is telling his father? Daddy, let's just count 7 generations together, me and you. I can't, if I don't do my part, then I will be breaking your chain of 7 generations. And I'll just tell you this quickly. You have Yaakov, Yehuda, Peretz, Chetzron, Ram, Aminadav, and who's his 7th generation? Yaakov's 7th generation is Nachshon. Nachshon ben Aminadav is going to be the one who's going to take that Nis'a v'nelecha. He's the first linsoa. He's the first to travel. He's from Shevet Yehuda. His flag is the first to break camp and lead the pack and lead the charge and be in the front and not in the back. And Yehuda is saying, Kiluleit mamanu, if we didn't tarry, if we didn't hesitate, we already would have shavnu, returned ze pa'amayim. He's talking about the trip that you didn't take with your brother, and the trip now that you're going to allow your sons to take with their brother. Let us travel with our brother, Binyamin, so that we could do a kapara for your unwillingness to travel with your brother. You know what what Yisrael answers? To me is the most beautiful part. Yisrael answers and says, Im ken, efozot asu. If that's the case, then do this. And asu is spelled like Esav, but that's just for another day. He says this, and if anything makes me happy, this makes me happy. Israel tells his children, if you're going to go and take that trip and go on that journey to reunify brothers, you're going to unify amongst yourself to do the unification that I didn't do with myself, that I didn't do with my own brother, then tichu mizimrat haaretz. Do me a favor and take from the produce of the land, vehoridu laish, and take for the man a mincha. What is he saying? Well, you know what? If I was Kayin and I have to really realize that my brother was really harmless all this time, he was the Hevel in the equation, and I have to recognize that I was the Kayin in that relationship, then please give me an opportunity, not just to rectify the fact that I didn't reunite with my brother, but give me a chance to rectify for Kayin as well, and take Zimrat Haaretz. What was Kayin's mincha? It was from the vegetation of the earth. Take that as a mincha. Do the mincha. You're going to do kapara, do it all the way. Do it for me and my brother, do it for Hevel, for Kayin and his brother. And sure enough, this is what happens. And just so to end, I know I went over time. I'm so sorry, but this is a little beautiful piece. I hope that you will enjoy it, since we spoke so much about Kayin, who's Kayin's seventh generation. You have Kayin, Chanoch, Irad, Michiael, Metushael, Lemech, and then you have Yaval and Yuval. These two boys. One, Yaval, was a Yoshev Ohalim. The only other Yoshev Ohalim in the whole Torah happens to be Kayin's seventh generation. So would we say that maybe Yaakov, as the Yoshev Ohalim, is also possible a redeemer for Kayin? Hold on, it gets a little better. If you need to go, I'll send you the tape. I'm sorry, I went over time. But guess what? We already know what Esav was. Esav was an Admoni. There's only one other Admoni in all of Torah. The only Admoni is David HaMelech. He was also the redhead. So hold on a minute. What is going on here? If Yaakov is going to be a way to rectify and unify brothers for Kayin, and Kayin's salvation is the Shivatayim, is the seventh generation. So you need somebody who's a Yoshev Ohalim. Perfect, we have that as Yaakov. But you know what Yuval, his brother, was? It even seems like they may have been twins like Yaakov and Esav. They named them Yaval and Yuval. Either way, you know what Yuval was? He was a harpist. He played the harp. Who do we know that played the harp? Yes, we do. David HaMelech was a shepherd who played the harp, who was Admoni, and he is going to be the one, the unifier. He is going to be the one that's able to do all of this unification. But just to make it interesting, let's end with this. I told you we need to count the 7 generations, and it's just too beautifully laid out for us. Let's start with Nachshon, because he was our 7th generation. Now he becomes the first. Nachshon, you could just check in the book of Ruth if you want to see the generations. It was pretty easy to find. Nachshon, Salmon, Boaz, Oved, Yishai, David. Who's our seventh generation? Shelomo, Shalom, Shlemut, wholeness, completeness, unification, brothers coming together, an understanding of the entirety of peace. David is going to be able, through channeling all of his Admoni and his Yoshev Ohalim and his shepherdness to bring Shalom, to bring Shlomo into the world. And I'll end today's class by saying two things, and that's it. One, in the time of Yeshua, when they were going back into Eretz Israel, it says, Ve'alu ha'am ish negdo. Remember what Esav had told him? Nis'a v'nelecha ve'elcha lenegdecha. Here they're going. Ish negdo. Each one, they may be in their own corners, but they're going together. And I'll end today's class with the last three verses, with three verses from Yeshayahu chapter 2. Vehalchu amim rabim. This is how they're going to go. Many nations are going to go together. And they're going to say, Lechu v'na'aleh. Let's go to Har Hashem, to Bet Elohei Yaakov. Let's go to the house of the God of Yaakov. And let's also, v'nelcha, the same words, lechu v'nelecha, the same words that Esav was proposing. So let us go and let us walk in his paths. You know, the next part of that verse is, Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah udvar Hashem Yerushalayim. We know that verse, but did we realize that the only way for Torah to come from Zion is first for brothers to unify and come together? The next verse says, V'shafat ben hagoyim, he will judge amongst the goyim, v'hochiach le'amim rabim, and many of the people's fates will be decided. And you know this next verse. And by the way, V'shafat ben hagoyim, we're hearing, le'om mi'le'om ni'emat, shenei goyim bebitnech, the whole idea of the Yaakov and Esav reunification. You ready? And they will cut their swords down, and they will make them into plowshares. Who was the sword man? Al chod becha tichyeh. Esav was the man of the sword. The sword man is going to take his sword and beat it down into a plow. And you know these words, if I say them in Hebrew, lo yisagoy el goy cherev velo yilmedu od milchama. And then, and only then, never will one enemy rise his sword up against the other, and there will be no more war. And the last verse says, Bet Yaakov, lechu v'nelecha. There's our words again. The house of Yaakov. Let us go. And the last two words say, where are we going? Be'or Hashem, to the light of God. And so I'd like to suggest that when we send messages, we have to be so careful. Are we sending messages from inside, outside? Or are we first supposed to internalize the messages from our brain to our heart, from our mouth to our hands? And in doing so, please, let us remember that in order to be Be'or Hashem, in order to be in the light of God, we have to start creating the best case scenarios for ourselves. God's not answering the prayer of the person who is mapping out for God what the worst things could happen. Let's start mapping out for God what are the best things that could happen. And when we do that, then we could all, we could all travel, we could move forward, and we could, God willing, move forward in a peaceful way. We could be unifiers, we could be whole, we could bring shalom, and we could once again rebuild the kingdom that Shlomo HaMelech started to build. I thank you all for joining. I didn't realize I went that over time. I'm so sorry. Have a beautiful day. I will unmute you if you have anything that you would like to say. And oh my gosh,
Thank you,
Thank you
Yashikoa.
so
God
much.
bless
Thank
you and the
you.
family.
Beautiful.
It's
Thank you
beautiful.
very
Thank you so
much.
thank
very
you. And I
Beautiful,
see
Claire.
Rachel,
No worries.
Esap's father
It's
couldn't make
great.
it.
Thank you
So
so
nice.
much.
Thank you.
I have a
Wonderful.
question.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, I see a couple of
Vivien?
comments here about a Gilgul. I don't know enough about Gilgulim, so I can't, but you mentioned Mordechai and Haman, and I do speak a lot about that, so maybe we'll do a class about that.
Vivien, a quick
And
question.
now some of you, yes, who is that?
Michelle.
Wait, Michelle, how do I get a thing of gallery view? Hold on, I could see
I'm
now.
wearing green.
Okay, I'm here with you. Oh, hi, Michelle. Michelle, you commented before. Hi.
Yes. So I just need you to give me the page for that, for when Esav says, Nisa venelcha.
Are you in the blue book?
Yes.
Page
And then
one,
you
it's
referred
page
back to-
178.
I got that part. I got that part. And then one in Miketz. Where are we in Miketz?
Oh, the one in Miketz is chapter 43.
Yeah, I'm with you. I just in the pasuk.
Oh, page 240, pasuk 8.
8.
8, 9, 10, and 11 is what I spoke about today. Hi, Shelley, Copit.
Oh, I see. Let us arise and go. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so my point was that we have to keep moving forward and we can't move back. And as long as Yaakov is moving back, we're in trouble. And Yehuda is the one that comes and tells him, Daddy, it's time to move forward. And he uses this language, I think he's talking about moving forward throughout the generations,
Right.
going all the way back to the earliest Yaakov, the earliest Cain, Hevel, let's bring the Zimra, let's bring the fruit. I don't know, that's how I read it. And I
for
feel
all
like
the issues, we have with Esav, and there are many to this day, we have to remember he was also Avraham Avinu's son.
he was Avraham Avinu's grandson. He does marry from the family of
Grandson,
Yishmael.
sorry.
I want to, but I do want to say that I think this is a bold message the Torah is giving to say, once brothers, and you could once again, whether it's us reunifying with the lineage of Esav, or if you're not going to reunify with them, what is Yehuda telling his father? Let us at least reunify with each other.
Right.
Let's at least, if we don't want to.
And what did we call the latest accord? The Abraham Accord.
They called it the Abraham Accord. Good for you. Yes.
So there you go. Back to Avraham Avinu.
I love that. I think that's great.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a fabulous day.
Thank you, Vivien. Bye, Viv.
Bye, and thank you for your beautiful comments. I'm seeing them now. Once I shut
it, I'll get back to it later. How are you? Okay.
Have a great day, guys.
Get me
Bye, Vivien.